Welcome back to Sunday edition. Now, top politicians of the National Super Alliance are split as to whether NASA leader Raila Odinga should be sworn in on the 12th of December. The division pits mostly younger politicians against their more seasoned counterparts who believe doing so would be catastrophic for the image of the former Prime Minister. Let's first listen in, however, to what Raila Odinga had to say.
Tuliambia nyinyi ya kwamba wakiapisha, tulisema namna hiyo, nataka mwelewe kwa makini kabisa. Nyinyi mnajua Raila Odinga si muoga. Nafikiri mimi naweza kuwa muoga. Sawa. Yale tunataka kufanya. Maana haka unajua kuna kuapishwa na kuapishwa. Hapa Uganda, naita Bwana Besigye aliapishwa kama rais. Hakuapishwa? Sio? Wiki jana kule Zimbabwe Bwana Mnangagwa waliapishwa, hakuapishwa? Basi tutaapisha.
All right, and before we get into that conversation, let's give political analyst Mutinda Kavemba a chance to comment on the cabinet formation by President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I only have 2 points. That according to me, the key things that the president needs to balance is the issue of inclusivity, which is promised to do, and competence. This issue of succession should actually be a product of these 2 things, competence and inclusivity, that we need to have people who can deliver on the mandate. And once we have that, then we'll have a government that will do so well that the issue of succession will be sorted out. Every Kenyan will be in agreement that we need continuity from what has been done in the 5 years, that is between 2017 and 2022, then it should be automatic that then we need a continuity of this, so that we don't isolate succession as an issue that we need to focus on and lose sight of delivery of services to Kenyans. Right. I believe once that is done, because let me give you an example. There are Kenyans who are known to change things. Kenya National Examinations Council, we had gotten to a point that our exams had become so messy that it was almost a national crisis. Then we appointed someone called Professor Magoha to head the Kenya National Examination Council. Right. And in the last 2 years, we've performed much better in terms of how we've managed our examinations than we've done in a long time. And people have somehow again regained confidence in our examination system, our school examination system. That is the kind of thing we want to see in the cabinet. We want to see people who are going to come and change their respective dockets and for the benefit of the common mwananchi. So that by the time we get to 2022, then it will actually, the succession thing will just fall in place in terms of this is a government that has gone out of its way to improve infrastructure, to improve security, to improve education, to improve public health. And as Kenyans, we wouldn't want to stop that kind of thing. But isolating succession and starting to make decisions purely based on that might make us miss the mark. And it's important to note that the president is going for his last term. And that means that he has a legacy to build and protect. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do it would be to ensure that more Kenyans are satisfied with the services they are getting from the government. And the best way to do that is to have competent people man these ministries, run the parastatals and the different government agencies. If the president can do that, and at the same time also give Kenyans a sense of belonging that this is our government, that is the point on inclusivity. So if the president manages to balance those 2 issues of competence and inclusivity, then by 2022, it will be very easy for him to direct Kenyans as to which way he would want them to go in regard to success. succession.
Very briefly on this, Hesbon, before we move on, how is the president likely to balance this, considering it's a tough act for his deputy president, whose interest it is to start amassing political favors as early as now with the formation of the cabinet?
Well, I think for the deputy president, it's not as difficult as people would want to imagine, because he has done enough to amass enough capital to make him, the person to beat in 2022. And I think the composition of the cabinet and where they find themselves in now puts the two of them in a very good position. That for the president, the issue is a legacy. And for him to leave, a lasting legacy, he has to perform. So he has to appoint people who, first of all, are, drawn from all the regions in this country, so that we have regional balance, inclusivity, and meritocracy. And then secondly, these people must be qualified, because we are not short of qualified people from whichever part of this country. That is what the president has to do, to have people who will deliver and leave a legacy. And I think it bodes well for the deputy president, because if the deputy president supports him in having a team that delivers, then it will be very easy for the deputy president now to use that as a track record that I was with President Uhuru Kenyatta. This is what we delivered. So I think for them it's a balancing act to sit together and forget about succession and just tell Kenyans, tell the team that they'll come up with that what we want you guys to do is to deliver. Anyone who is not going to deliver, and the president has made this promise that he will crack the whip. If he manages to do that, it will flip down as something that the deputy president is part and parcel of. And I believe in the rule of democracy, that democracy is where power is given after a period of time. And you really don't have to do so much. Just do the right thing. And I think if the president does the right thing, the deputy supports him, the right thing will put the deputy president in a very strong position come 2022. And remember, the deputy president has supported the Right Honorable Raila before. So there is some political capital that is owed from Raila's backyard. You also understand that he comes from a very rich, voting bloc. So for him, he should not bother so much about who comes in terms of 2022. If he delivers, and he has President Uhuru Kenyatta to deliver, it will be a win-win for him.
All right, so let's talk about it will be a different situation with the opposition here. They say, wakiapisha na sisi tunapisha. Raila Odinga is said to be sworn in as the people's president on the 12th of December, something that is still debatable even within the opposition. But Brian, what is the value and the legality of this strategy?
Oh, thank you, Michelle. I think we have to revisit Article 1, Sabbatical 1 and Sabbatical 2, which talks about who actually owns the sovereignty. And the Constitution answers that as the people of this country. And the ideals of People's Assembly is very much entrenched on that particular clause. But the problem that we have is that we have two areas that we need to debate upon. And this is something that I've discussed before, where we have the place of the People's Assembly and the people's representatives. These are the two sides of the coin. And when you listen to what Raila is actually buying, the idea of People's Assembly is very much entrenched in that constitution. But the problem is that the Constitution does not operationalize, does not give a way of operationalizing the People's Assembly ideals, in the sense that it has not created the structures on how to actually operationalize the whole concept of People's Assembly. But the Constitution has actually given us vessels and tools or instruments or structures that operationalizes people to be represented by certain people. That's why we have structures such as the county assemblies. We have structures such as National Assembly. That's where we have structures such as the executive, the president and his cabinet and the deputy. And that is the kind of model that we have crafted in our Constitution and supported to an extent of voting for it 67% when we did so. And that means that the People's Assembly idea, which is a legality, which has its own values within the Constitution, lacks the kind of flesh that needs to give it some impetus. And therefore it begs the question of how do we move further to operationalize the idea of People's Assembly so that we can support it further. And I'll tell you that that requires a serious interrogation of the Constitution as a document, where we need to go back to the drawing board and give it structures. And the way of giving structures or some impetus or breath of life is actually by amending the Constitution to create those structures within that space so that it can be operational. Because if you ask me, what is the approach? that's supposed to be applied to operationalize the whole idea. I'll tell you, there's nothing given in the Constitution. The only idea given is people to be represented by the people, by certain individuals of their choice through competitive election or some nominations process, and so on and so on. But when we talk about, we revisit the issue of now wakiapisha tunaapisha, I think now we have to look to revisit the issue of the legality of this based on the Penal Code Cap 40, which talks about treason. Some people have said that those are treasonous statements that need to be given a lot of weight and attention when it comes to addressing the legal framework under which those statements were anchored or directed. And I'll tell you that there is a serious, there's a thin line between what is talked about and upping his game. Upping his game in terms of upping his stature. You know, ballooning himself to an extent that he can be considered when it comes to further negotiations on how to share power. And that's why when you look critically, he might not be sworn if my statements as a person are taken into consideration. It might not mean that he is going to be sworn in, but he might be speaking or saying some statements which will now elevate him to a certain level where he cannot be taken for granted. And when push comes to shove, he has to be called to a certain table of negotiation, and his stakes is already high. And therefore, that could be a game plan that the opposition is also playing. But when you look strictly, if the rule of law is something to be applied, those statements, when he says that Akiapishwa, I'll be sworn in or he'll swear himself, I think those are not light statements in the perspective of the law, because we have a government which was actually put in place by the instruments that we have supported as a system. We have a government that we have actually elected as a people, no matter whether it meets certain thresholds or credentials or not. But the instruments of power that are defined in the constitutions were used. The structures were used, the tools were used to elevate one to where he is as a president. Anything on the contrary is actually something which we can say is treasonous. And if we can dig deeper into the law, Cap 40, of course, if all the legal brains can be put on the table, I think something can come out of that which is close to treason.
All right, so speaking of the rule of law, because this is again another instance where we're seeing top legal minds differing or interpreting same constitutional clauses, but very differently. Kuti High Court came out very strongly just about a month ago, barring or restraining county assembly from passing any motions to implement people's assemblies. The opposition has come out and said that that decision by the Kuti High Court was unconstitutional. They do not recognize that decision. Is that, to you, Dismas, a blatant disregard of the rule of law, considering even the Constitution says people, citizens, can be represented either through direct representation or through the will of the people? You know, so it's an instance of it's either one or the other. So we cannot have county assemblies and people's assemblies work hand in hand.
Well, my understanding of the legal framework is that whatever Raila plans to do, if he actually thinks that he can be sworn in as a president of the Republic of Kenya on Independence Day, 12th of December, is simply a waste of time. He knows for a fact that it's illegal, it's unacceptable. It's that he can be sworn in right now. The idea just resides in his stretch of imagination. So assuming that he gets sworn in, where does he go? He goes back to his current residence or he goes to State House. And who swears him in? Because when you're getting sworn into office, you must have the instruments of power. And the most important thing, you must have the security agencies behind you, like what happened in Zimbabwe. So whatever Mr. Raila Odinga is doing today is simply responding to pressure as created by his voters. And his voters are the ones who have created the pressure, telling him, "Akiapishwa, tunaapishwa." Maybe the best he can do on 12th of December is to declare himself as the de facto leader of all the People's Assembly countrywide, which he is, because he's the architect behind those People's Assembly. But anything else that is going to be sworn into office is a waste of time. And I'm wondering why Brian is struggling, trying to quote the Constitution, declaring there are these several caps that declares it legal. You can look at Article 1 in whichever way you want to look at it, but it will not create a provision for you to be sworn in. So that you have two presidents in Kenya, President Kenyatta and President Raila Odinga, doing what? That's a waste of time. And in as much as NASA may have some of the best lawyers with serious intellectual infrastructure in Kenya, they also know that they are wasting of time. They're merely responding to people's pressure. But what Raila Odinga can do on 12th of December is to give his supporters a roadmap of how he intends to achieve his vision. And his vision is he's saying that he wants to sanitize the electoral process. So that's one he can do. And number two, he talks about inclusivity. That's one he can do. And believe you me, Raila is probably the only person in Kenya who has the capacity to make President Kenyatta nervous for 24 hours a day. Because if you go to parts of, up to 70% of Kenyans, according to the last elections, take his word to the bank. If he goes to Western Kenya and he makes a statement, people take it to the bank. Anyway, he goes. And if there's anybody doubting that, they need to go and have a conversation with retired President Moi or retired President Kibaki and even the current leadership. Because he's got irrational supporters all over, and whatever he says has got the effect of law. You recall when we were reviewing our constitution, people say that if Raila Odinga has gone through this constitution, then I don't have a position. I'll run with this, including professors of law at the University of Nairobi. And Brian has indicated he's a legal scholar. His colleagues indicated that if Raila Odinga said something, then we run with it. And again, I want to use an incident to illustrate this. You recall when he came from the US and he was doing his rounds in town, on Jogo Road, there were incidences which should now worry President Kenyatta. Because his supporters, for some reason, it seems to me they've been radicalized. Because they were blocking the road, and when the policemen approached them with the live bullets, they told them, be our guest. You can go ahead and shoot, we'll count the bullets, number one. Number two, when they were pouring the acidic water, they said, we don't mind taking a shower. When they were throwing the tear gas canisters, they said, we are going to inhale and exhale. I didn't know it happened. So where we as a nation, when you have people who do not fear the authority, where I was born and brought up in the village, the moment you see a policeman, you've seen a government. So the moment you disobey a policeman, then things are very thick. There were even some people who were captured on cameras telling policemen, the only difference between you and me is the police uniform you're putting on. Hiyo kiraoni umevaa ndio is the only difference. So that should worry President Kenyatta as he tries to put on his cabinet. And if you allow me just to say something about the cabinet, right now it's becoming very complicated for President Kenyatta. You recall during the last time, putting together his cabinet was a walk in the park. But now there are reports that he intends to go for a retreat with his deputy to formulate a cabinet, meaning that things are very thick. There's something like maybe a disruptive agenda. And in my view, when he's forming that cabinet, he must not place a huge premium on the succession politics. Because majority of Kenyans right now do not care who is going to be president in 2022. Majority of Kenyans today, they want to be able to buy bread. And for the few who are able to buy bread, they want to be able to buy their butter. So the president needs to be very careful to run away from cartels. And he must not reward loyalty only. He needs to get people in that cabinet with sufficient political capital who can afford to tell the king that the king is naked. Because right now, one would easily say up to 90% of the cabinet has no idea of their role within the cabinet. They go for cabinet meetings and they receive lectures, they go back to their offices, they don't deliver anything. I mean, like for instance, when you look at the secretary responsible for sports, how can we lose so much sporting opportunities and you have a cabinet secretary being paid highly by the taxpayer and he's seated at that office doing absolutely nothing? When we lose international opportunities, what does he do? He takes a cup of tea. And then you have a president who doesn't even bother to fire or suspend that kind of a person. Go to foreign affairs. You've got the principal secretary, Monica Juma. Right now, there are Kenyans bleeding in South Sudan. There are Kenyans bleeding in the Middle East. But what has Monica Juma done to do these things? She just seated at her office having a cup of tea. So President Kenyatta, when he's putting together his new cabinet and principal secretaries, he must ensure that he gets divergent ideas so that when they go for those cabinet meetings or when he's meeting the principal secretaries, it's a brainstorming session. People shouldn't go to that cabinet meeting worried. They're not able to say anything. They wait for a lecture from President Kenyatta and from President Ruto. Then they say, yes, sir, yes, sir. They go away without implementing anything.
All right. Let's come to you, Hezbollah, and back to the opposition. What then is the way forward for NASA leader Raila Odinga, considering the division now that is brewing? There are those who say he should be sworn in on the 12th of December. There are those who feel that would be catastrophic for his image as an opposition leader, not just locally, but internationally as well.
Well, I think the Right Honourable Raila Odinga is in, a place that no one would really envy. I'm not so sure that there is division as it were, because what we get about this division is just grapevine and gossip on the social media. If you look at how Raila Odinga has sustained the opposition, you actually give credit to him that since 2013 he has managed to galvanize these people. But then when you start talking about wakiapisha tunaapisha, then things become a little bit murky. One, there is a scholar, a great scholar that I really respect, called Dr. Donald Smith, who says that communication when made in public increases commitment. And I want to believe that whatever the Right Honorable Raila Odinga and the guys behind NASA are saying is that when we communicate this in public, what does it do? It actually gives the other side of the political divide the impression that we are committed, to having ourselves represent the aspirations of the many Kenyans who are very happy when he says, wakiapisha, tunaapisha. So from a communication point of view, this is a team that is actually pushing itself to a very high pedestal to push for a negotiation, so much so that when they are now negotiating, the level of ceding ground, even if it is substantive from where they are, they will still land at a substantive point of negotiation. That is where I'm seeing it, that it is not so much about him being sworn in, but it's a question of putting pressure on the Jubilee government. And we understand where this is coming from. I mean, this guy didn't just wake up and decide that wakiapisha tunaapisha. I'm convinced and persuaded to a large extent that there's some thought process, there's some strategic thinking behind this. They've looked at the law, they understand what the law says, and they have a case, And if President Uhuru Kenyatta is committed to his inclusivity and reaching out, I think even them, they're making it a lot more difficult for him to just reach out at a superficial level, that he has to actually reach out. But having said that, I also believe that, it's going to be murky. You cannot tell how it's going to end. Because on the one hand, when you promise your supporters that kind of commitment and you make it in public, and then the other side does not cede ground. You are in between this side that is supposed to cede ground and whatever your supporters are defending.
There was a similar, swearing in parallel to the president's swearing in on Tuesday, and that did not happen, and supporters were very disappointed by the opposition.
So I think the bigger picture here is he's showcasing, the people who need to cede ground, that there is support, that is willing to put their lives on the line because of wakiapisha, tunaapisha. You apisha, we need to apisha. But I think it is putting us in a very tricky situation because, again, if he swears himself in, there is that issue of the international community, the penal code coming on board. What I know is Raila is intelligent enough to know how to deal with that. But it's a lot more difficult because if the law does not set in, and he doesn't swear himself in, then how does he deal with his supporters? I think that is a very tricky situation to find himself in. Because if the Jubilee government does not cede, and they don't look like they are going to cede any ground, and then he doesn't swear himself in, so where does he go? I think that is tricky, and from where NASA finds itself, I think that is what they are grappling with. But just like Dismas says, that, this should not be looked at as an individual affair, because I'm persuaded to a large extent that this is not about Raila Odinga. This is about people who believe that there are certain things that have to be addressed, and given that President Uhuru Kenyatta has the next 5 years, he just needs to be compelled by having a substantive, divergent opinion within the apparatus and the structures that are going to address that. And that, I think, is what NASA is pushing.
All right, so Mutinda, before we take a break, is the message that NASA is trying to convey being received well enough? Because just recently, Raila Odinga cemented the calls for an economic boycott. We've already heard of the, very high figures of the monies that have been lost since the calls for an economic boycott in the country.
Yeah, my position has been that NASA is pursuing a disruptive agenda so as to force government to negotiate. Right. And this declaration that is going to be sworn in on the 12th is an attempt to escalate that disruptive agenda to increase and enhance political tensions in the country and even polarize the country more politically with one intention, to ensure that they cannot be ignored. And that all these actions are geared towards that, including what you've spoken about, the issues of the economic boycott, now the issue of him being sworn in. All these are part of NASA's disruptive agenda, because the NASA is trying to make sure that there is no way they are going to be ignored, and whatever positions that they've taken cannot be ignored. So they have to find a way of making sure that these tensions and the polarizations are sustained. So in my opinion, this attempt, this declaration that is going to be sworn in is just an attempt to escalate that to levels that cannot be ignored, and probably to also now bring in the international community to try and force people to the negotiating table. Because, from the word go, they've said that they are going to make sure that Kenya is not governable if these electoral issues are not sorted out.
Right.
And everything should be looked in from that perspective, that there is a disruptive agenda, and they don't seem like they're backing off, and so they have to find new ways of ensuring that it is sustained. We've spoken about, someone has mentioned about one of my co-panelists about Article 1 and 2,
right,
about the sovereign will of the people. But Article 3 also talks about how government should be formed, and that any other way of forming government other than what is envisaged in the Constitution, which of course is through the electoral process, is unlawful. And so the legality or illegality of swearing in is not even in dispute. Even this month is in agreement with that is clearly illegal. It is not provided for anywhere in law, but because there is a disruptive agenda that has to be pursued, then there has to, exactly, signals have to be sent. Right. And actually the main target group is not only the government, but also the NASA followers, so they do not start losing hope and feeling like there is nowhere they are going. So they are also trying to give their people hope that we know where we're going. Exactly, the journey to Canaan has not stopped, and as much as it might not be very clear, have faith in your leadership that we are going to go there. Right. And 12th of December, why the choice of 12th of December, for instance? He could have as well chosen any other day, but on that day he knows that we are going to be on holiday and we are going to be celebrating a very important, it is also similar to the choice of them mourning on the day that the president was, yes, it is to send signals that the country is still not united.
All right, let me catch you for that, because Kavembe, and take a short break on Sunday edition. We'll be back with more conversations on what's been making headlines in the political scene this week.